Okay, so continuing on in our conversation about the adaptations in the cardiovascular system. So we talked about the blood, the expansion of blood volume, which involved a significant expansion of plasma volume and a moderate expansion of red blood cells, and then other aspects of blood. Well, now we're going to talk about the changes in cardiovascular performance. So, along with that upwards of 40% increase in blood volume, we also see a significant increase in cardiac output. Okay? We see increases in cardiac output of up to about 50%. Okay? And so, if you think about what cardiac output is describing, cardiac output is the amount of blood ejected by the heart per minute, which is proportional to the stroke volume, which is the amount of blood ejected by the heart with every heartbeat, multiplied by beats per minute, or the heart rate. So stroke volume and heart rate independently, the reason why cardiac output goes up is because stroke volume and heart rate are increasing during pregnancy. And so here the dotted line is stroke volume, the solid line is heart rate. And you can see that stroke volume actually increases very rapidly during the initial weeks of pregnancy. And so much of the rise in cardiac output during the first 20 weeks or so is actually a result of the rise in stroke volume. While the last 10 weeks or so of pregnancy, the continued rise in cardiac output is more due to a rise in heart rate. Okay? But something is increasing, both stroke volume, the volume of blood that's ejected by the heart, and also something is increasing heart rate. So the ways that we increase stroke volume is to increase contractility of the heart, right? And also increase the filling of the heart. And the way that we increase heart rate is we accelerate the rate of action potentials that are getting fired through the sinoatrial node. So the increased myocardial contractility, the increase in myocardial contractility, meaning that the cardiac muscle itself is actually contracting harder to create a larger stroke volume, is actually done in part by simply the effect of placental estrogen on the contractile proteins of the myocardial tissue. So estrogen actually directly enhances the relationship between these contractile proteins and ATP so that you get a greater contraction for every unit of energy. So estrogen actually directly increases the contractility of the myocardium. And then we also get an increase in stroke volume by simply increasing end-diastolic volume. Okay, so the hypervolemic state of pregnancy, this rise in blood volume, increases ventricular filling, which increases end-diastolic volume. And that reminds us of this Frank-Starling relationship of the heart, that as you fill the heart more, you stretch the muscle, and you actually enhance the contractility of the muscle. Okay. So despite the rise in cardiac output, despite that rise in cardiac output, mean arterial pressure, blood pressure in mom, is either going to remain the same or will often decrease. Okay? It is not normal. It is absolutely not normal for blood pressure to increase during pregnancy. It will tend to either stay the same or decrease. Okay? And that's despite the fact that you have increased cardiac output, and it's despite the fact that you have significantly more blood volume. Okay? So why is it that in the face of increased cardiac output and increased blood volume, pressure is staying the same or even decreasing. Okay? And we can actually see this in this graph. We can see the weeks of gestation, and we actually see that we get this really large drop in blood pressure within the first 20 weeks of pregnancy, and it tends to plateau out after that. So this significant drop in mean arterial pressure is happening at the same time that we're getting a rise in cardiac output and a rise in blood volume. Okay? And now, if you recall, mean arterial pressure is equal to cardiac output times total peripheral resistance. So cardiac output, we know, is increasing, okay? But mean arterial pressure is either decreasing or it's staying the same, right? So that must mean that total peripheral resistance must be going down dramatically. And that actually is what's going on. So total peripheral resistance is dropping, and it drops because of regional changes in maternal blood flow. So these regional changes in maternal blood flow actually account for most of the total peripheral resistance, and it's actually the destination. These changes in maternal blood flow is actually the destination of most of that increased blood volume. So it includes the utero-placental circulation, right? So that includes the remodeled spiral arteries, the placenta, and the umbilical cord. So by term, the uterus is receiving about 10 to 20% of total maternal cardiac output. Compare that to non-pregnancy, it was more like 1 or 2%. Okay? So mom's sending, pre-pregnancy, you're sending about 1 or 2% of your cardiac output to your uterus. During pregnancy, it's 10 to 20%. And the high uterine perfusion, as I mentioned before, is due to the remodeling of those uterine spiral arteries. And they turn them into very low resistance vessels. Those vessels can no longer respond to vasoconstrictors. Okay. We also have significant increases in renal blood flow. Okay? More metabolism, more waste production, and more need to urinate out that waste. So we increase our renal blood flow by about 35 to 60%, okay? And increase glomerular filtration rate by about 40 to 45%. Okay? So total peripheral resistance, again, is going down because we're dilating the utero-placental circulation and sending significant amounts of blood there. We're dilating the renal blood vessels and sending significant amounts of blood there. And we're also dilating peripheral vessels that perfuse the skin. So again, because of these increased metabolic needs, we also need to dissipate more heat. Okay? And so we do that in order to maintain normal body temperature. And that results in increased metabolic rate is proportional to an increased oxygen consumption of 20 to 30%. Okay? And whenever we produce ATP as a form of energy, so anytime we undergo metabolism, about 75% of the energy is lost or dissipated in the form of heat. So we need to get rid of that heat so that we can maintain our body temperature.